The landman saved the fever pasture for the very end of the sheet, the way a fellow saves the sourest joke, for after the coffee is poured. And when he got to it, he grinned and said, "And here's the crown of the whole estate. Boys, 40 acres of the finest tick pasture in creation, kill you a good steer every summer free of charge. Who'll give me $1?" And the Sail Barn Cafe laughed the way a room laughs when it is held to laugh in through 6 honest parcels just to spend it all on the 7th. Everybody in 3 townships knew the Ledford Low pasture by its right name, which was the Fever 40, and its other name, the Graveyard Grass. 40 acres of the sweetest bottom timothy in the valley that not one man on earth could graze. Because the ground was a tick nest 40 years deep, and a cow turned onto it came off it in 3 weeks staggering and yellow-eyed with a fever the ticks carried in their bite, went down in a fence corner and did not get up. Old man Ledford had buried enough good cattle at the foot of that field to stock a small ranch before he strung it off. The ground the county pointed at to teach a boy that some dirt is just bad dirt, and the sweeter the grass, the surer it will kill you. So the landman asked $1 and got the laugh, and worked it down, 50 cents, a quarter, going once for the Fever 40 and a fence, and it was about to fold back unsold when a small brown woman at the edge of the crowd in a man's canvas coat lifted one finger and said, in a voice that did not hurry, $4. $4 for the Graveyard Grass. Ada Sturgill, 61 years old, a lean, weathered widow, a hair over 5 foot with iron gray hair in a hard knot, and a face the color of a saddle, a woman most of that room knew only as the little Sturgill widow who had moved on to the burnt-out Kell place that winter and kept a screeching pen of guinea fowl, of all the useless fool birds a person could keep. She had bid on the single field the whole county agreed would kill anything with blood in it, and the laugh that went around was the laugh men laugh when the world hands them a story too tidy to pass up. The Guinea woman buying the Fever 40, and the landman banged it sold before she could think better of it, and a man by the stove called out friendly as a slap, dig the hole first. Ada. Save yourself the second trip, and the room laughed again. She folded the receipt into her coat and walked out through the whole grinning mess of them without shortening her stride by an inch, because there was nothing wrong with her hearing. And she had also, standing quiet at the back of that room, done a piece of arithmetic not one man at that stove had thought to do. She had come up in the Red Clay Hill country 200 miles south where the ticks were a plague in a good year, and down there the poor people knew the oldest cure there is, which is not a dip you buy by the drum, it is a bird. It is the guinea fowl, the loud gray half-wild African hen a hill family keeps not for eggs and not for meat, but for one plain reason. That a guinea walks the ground all day with its head down and eats ticks by the 100, cleans a dooryard and a hog pen and a whole pasture of every crawling thing that carries the fever, and asks nothing back but a tall tree to roost in. And here was a woman raised on that truth, listening to men laugh about 40 acres of tick ground with the sweetest grass in the valley standing on it. And to her it was no graveyard, it was the richest bottom in the township with one solvable trouble walking on 8 legs, and it was going for $4. She had walked that pasture the week before, knelt in the timothy and watched the ticks climb her stocking by the dozen, and smiled, because a heavy tick load is only a curse to a body with no bird. And she had 140 guineas in a pen screaming to be turned loose on exactly this. She bought the Fever 40 for $4 and turned her army onto it. She spent that first spring hatching every egg the flock would give her, running her Guinea count past 300, and ranged them over the 40 from the creek out. A gray, screeching tide, combing the grass with their heads down from first light to dark. 40 years of curse coming apart under 10,000 small, hungry beaks. By the end of that first summer, a man could walk the fever 40 in his shirt sleeves and come out clean, and Ada put 4 cull steers on it in September, bought cheap because they were poor, and watched them not die, watched them go fat and slick on the sweetest grass in the valley. And she notched the count into the gatepost by the road with her pocket knife where a slow truck could read it. And nobody drove past louder than Roy Tandy, who ran 300 head on the good high ground above her, and who stood at the sale barn scale that fall with his thumbs in his belt and told the whole loafing crowd that the Guinea woman down there was farming ticks with a flock of screaming buzzards, and you cannot make a living off ground the good Lord condemned, and got his laugh and Ada. At the far end of that scale house, took her check and walked out through the middle of it without changing her step, and the room went quiet behind her the way a room does when the joke will not flinch. If you are the kind of person who can look at ground everybody calls poisoned and ask not what it will kill, but what it is already feeding that nobody has thought to use. Stay with me and subscribe before we go on, because the passed over that came through when the bought and paid for went down are the only stories we keep here, and the wet year was coming. It came the next spring, a long, warm, soaking wet spring, the kind the old people number, and the ticks rose out of the whole county at once in a plague nobody living had seen. And the fever came riding in on them, and all up and down the valley the good cattle on the good high grass began to stagger and go yellow-eyed and down in the corners. Roy Tandy stood at his own fence and watched steers he had bred for 20 years die the way old man Ledford's had died, and the vet ran clean out of the little there was to sell. And men who had been fat and loud in the fall could not find the bottom of it, because you cannot spray a whole county fast enough to beat a wet spring. And down in the bottom the fever 40 stayed clean. That was the thing not one of them had figured, that a pasture walked over every daylight hour by 300 guineas is a pasture with no ticks left on it to carry the fever. And her cull steers grazed the graveyard grass fat and bright-eyed through the worst tick summer in 50 years, while the blue ribbon cattle on the ridges above them died on ground that had never known a bird, and she did not lose a head. Word of a clean pasture in a county gone to the fever travels faster than the fever does, and they came up the Kell Lane with their hats already in their hands. The same men who had told her to dig the hole first come to ask the Guinea woman if she had birds to sell. She sold to every man who came, first come and no favorites, started them a flock apiece and told each one plain how to keep it, and sold her Keats by the boxful into a county that could not hatch them fast enough. And here is the part they told about for years. She did not gouge them. She could have named any figure she pleased that spring, but she charged the fair ordinary price a pen of guineas had brought in the easy year before, not $1 more. And when Tandy's own hired boy asked her straight why she would leave that kind of money lying on the ground, she worked the gate latch a while and said, "The only thing that has ever stood between me and them is what a body does when the other fellow is caught short. And I am too old to sell that off for one wet spring's money." And that was the whole of her speech, and it was enough. Roy Tandy came up the lane himself the third week of it, his herd cut to nothing, and his pride left somewhere back down the road, and he stood in her screeching yard turning his hat in his two hands and could not for a moment find anywhere to set his eyes, and what he finally got out was that he had come to buy breeding guineas, and to ask whether she would bring her grown flock up onto his ruined ground and let them clean it while his few left-standing cattle healed, and pay her for the doing of it. Ada looked at him level a while and said, "The birds I will sell you, same price as everybody. The line starts where it starts, and the cleaning I will do," and she named a fair figure. And he had come prepared to argue, and did not argue 1 second, and they wrote it out on his tailgate. And then Roy Tandy, who had told a whole-scale house that you cannot make a living off ground the good Lord condemned, looked down at that one clean green field lying in a valley full of dying cattle, and said, quieter than she had ever heard a loud man speak, "I was wrong about the whole of it, and about the manner of it, too, and I am sorry for the manner." And she said, "I know it, and the birds will be up on your ridge Monday." And that was the end of the war on that road, not with a speech, but with a flock of the screaming buzzards walking uphill to work. She farmed the Fever 40 11 more years, and the cleaning contracts grew until her useless birds were clearing more fever off that county than every drum of dip the co-op could sell. And when Ada Sturkle died old and easy in the little Kell cabin she never once thought of leaving, the first thing anybody looks at driving that road today is the gatepost she never planed smooth, standing gray with every notch she ever knifed into it, and above it the Fever 40 lies clean and green the whole year round, the graveyard grass grazed fat and sound at last, made safe not by anything a man could buy, but by the small hungry mouths of the birds a whole county laughed at, on the ground a whole county threw away. So look around you at whatever it is they are laughing at this year, the fever ground, the useless stock, the screeching flock, the person the whole county has quietly written off, and do the older arithmetic, and ask not what the crowd says a thing will cost you, but what it is already quietly worth, on the day the weather turns and the fever rises. And if you have a piece of ground or a passed-over thing in your own life that turned out to be worth everything when the hard year came, tell me about it down below, and tell me which valley you are reading this from, because those are the stories we keep here. Think on it. And the wind moves over the Fever 40 where the guineas cleaned the curse, the county condemned. And the notched gray post holds its count against the weather, and the gray birds come down out of the willows at first light, with their heads to the ground, and the graveyard grass lies green and safe from the creek clear to the ridge, and somewhere down a valley road a truck slows so a driver can read a gatepost, and the men who laughed at the stove are all these years gone quiet. And the woman nobody counted feeds the county yet.